Welcome to SavvyTalks, the podcast that explores the world of earning money online with your host, Kris Dano. Each week, Kris brings you insightful conversations with experts and entrepreneurs from various industries, sharing tips, strategies, and inspiring stories to help you on your online money-making journey. From managing your finances to developing a winning mindset, SavvyTalks covers all aspects of building a successful online business. So sit back, relax, and tune in to learn from the best in the business on SavvyTalks with your host, Kris Dano.
Welcome to another episode of Savvy Talks podcast, where we talk about money, mindset, habits, and motivation. And today, our guest is someone who helps experts to earn more by rapidly building authority and visibility so that experts can command premium fees, work less hours, and never have to suffer a bad fit client again. And he would be sharing insights on how to find, hire, and work with freelancers efficiently and effectively. So if you are looking to hire your first freelancer or second, or is planning to build a remote team, or even if you're just even if you're a freelancer who is looking to find the best fit client for you, then stay at the end of this podcast episode, because you're going to be getting a lot of valuable insights from our guest today. So help me welcome Alastair McDermott. Hi, Alastair. It is so good to have you here.
Kris, thanks for having me on the show. I'm delighted to be here.
Yes, and I'm so excited to get started. But before we dive in, let's have the audience get to know you more. What is it that you do, what you love doing, and what you're passionate about?
So what I do is I help experts who are invisible to become known, to become recognized. So I like to say I help them to take off their cloak of invisibility, because a lot of people who are really great at what they do don't have any visibility in the marketplace. Nobody knows who they are. And so like if that's you, you could be working for 5, 10, 15, 20 years at something, but you don't really have anybody who knows what you do or that you're a true expert in your field. And there are certain steps that you need to take to become known, to become recognized. And so I have a brand called the Recognized Authority. And that's my goal, is to help people become known as the recognized authority in their field. And I'm like, my background is in web design. I have worked as a freelancer, and I have hired hundreds of freelancers myself over 17 years in business, I think. So I hired my first freelancer, I think, in 2005. And I have used all of the freelance hiring sites, and I've worked with lots of people, I think from maybe like 60 different countries at this point. So I have a lot of experience in working with freelancers and with hiring freelancers, and being one myself.
Awesome. And before we dive in, I was really interested on what you said about making like a recognized or have built authority. And for someone who is kind of like confused in doing that, what do you think is the best, or like the first thing that they should do to just be able to really get a visibility and start creating a plan out of it?
Sure. Well, so I've done a lot of research in this area. I surveyed over 1,000 consultants, and then I followed that up with about 45 or 50 interviews as well, to do a lot of research around this area to figure out like what is it that makes somebody an authority. And I've spoken to a lot of people who are authorities, authors, experts in their field. And so I paint the pattern that I saw, I call the journey to authority. And it's a pretty clear pattern. And so that is that everybody starts out at the same level. Everybody starts out as a novice. And so we're all at that, at the start of our journey. And we need to get experience at that point. And at some point, we go from being a novice to being an expert. And usually we don't have a speciality at that point, and usually we don't have much visibility either. So we've gone from being a novice with no experience to now being somebody who is good at what we do, but we tend to still be kind of more general and working in multiple areas. And the next step to become known as an authority in your field is, the last word there is very important, is your field. You have to actually niche down, you have to specialize. And niching down and specializing is something that a lot of people won't do, because there's a lot of fears around that. They're afraid to do it because they're afraid they'll pick the wrong thing, or they're afraid that by niching down, you're picking a smaller market, which you are. But
Yeah.
what happens is you're making yourself more relevant in that market. And so you can dominate if you pick a small enough market, you can actually dominate that. So that's the journey to authority goes from novice to invisible expert to specialist, and doing that specialization step, that gives you now much more focus, but you still don't have any visibility. And the next step after that then is to start to publish, to write, to speak, to talk about what you do, and to put your ideas and share your expertise with the world. And that's what gives you the recognition, and that's what brings you the last step from going from being this invisible specialist to being recognized as an authority. So that's kind of the journey as I see it.
Yeah. And for someone with a really strong knowledge about like visibility and authority, it's kind of like your field also to know how to hire someone, because then you can like make a whole thing of like what kind of criteria you're going to follow to hire a specific person that is really good at what they do. And how do you think that would apply to other freelancers or for business owners who are looking to hire freelancers, of like what they're good at what they do? What do you think is like kind of like 5 or advice or like tips that you can say for both sides of like, oh, if you're a client or if you're looking for a freelancer, here are like things that you would really have to look for a freelancer, because there are things that can really would know that they know what they're doing.
Yeah, so I guess if we go back to that journey to authority, the first thing is you've got to actually be good at what you do, and part of the first, like, it's a winding road that we follow. So the journey to authority is a winding road. We can do lots of different things, and part of the going from being a novice to being an expert is in experimenting and trying different things and learning different things, figuring out what you're good at and what you like to do and the types of people that you like to work with. And so there's a lot of that is about figuring out, because at some point, if you're going to specialize in the future, it's better to be specializing based on a broader knowledge, because then you know what you like to do. And so I think that getting kind of broad experience as a freelancer is important to kind of just figure out, okay, now some people may be very lucky, and the first or second thing that they try, they absolutely have a deep passion for and they love doing. And so they might kind of stumble into their specialization very easily and quickly. And that's great. If that's you, I mean, I'm very jealous, because it took me a long time to niche down and to find that. But so for like, one of the biggest mistakes that I see when I see, like, I get pitched, like everybody who's a business owner, we get pitched cold messages all the time for services from freelancers and from everybody. And one of the biggest mistakes I see is the person who does everything. And so I replied to somebody recently on LinkedIn because they offered to help me promote my podcast. They offered to help do ghostwriting for social media posts and for books. They offered to help me with my YouTube channel and run Facebook ads and Google AdWords. And there was an optimize my LinkedIn profile. I think I counted, and it was like 17 different things that they offered to do for me. And they claimed to be an expert. And nobody in the world is an expert at all of those 17 things. There's too much in it. And so when you claim to be an expert in too many different things, people are not going to believe you. And it looks really bad. It's like if there's a restaurant and they say, we specialize in Chinese food, or we specialize in Indian food. You know that the food there is going to be good. But if they say, well, we do pizza and we do Chinese food and we do Indian food and we do Thai and we do Japanese and we do, it becomes unbelievable. And it in the sense that we think that that's not true. So I think it's really important, if you're pitching yourself, even if you can do lots of different things, you should only lead with a couple of things. So even if behind the scenes you can help a client with, let's say you can help them with 10 different things and you're good at those 10 things, lead with 2. Tell them, I'm really great at number 1 and number 2. And there are other things I can help you with, but those are what I specialize in. And so lead with something, because then you can become known for that one thing. And it's much more credible to claim expertise in a small area rather than in too much.
Yeah. That totally makes sense. And this is just like thing that pops up in my head when you were like talking about it. Does it mean that like novice or like just people or freelancers who are just starting out, you think that they would be left behind with the competition, with especially with those who have already built their name or have already got a lot of results from what and found their kind of expertise and have established their name in the field. Let's just say example, social media. And for someone or a client who is looking to hire a business owner who's looking to hire a freelancer, how do you think they should like weigh down, like should they hire someone who really is good at these two things, or this novice or like just starting out who's kind of like pitching also other services?
Well, I think the responsibility is on us as business owners to hire the right person and to pick the right person for what we're trying to do. And I know that there's a temptation when you're the business owner to try and find somebody who can help you with lots of different things. But that's rarely the case that they're actually great at all of those things. And I think that we should be hiring people for specific roles. We should be hiring them for a narrower range of things. So, for example, I have an assistant who is full-time, but the things that I ask her to do, I don't expect her to know how to do everything. And so we work closely together and we do some training together. And if there's something that I know how to do, I'll do like maybe I'll record a Loom video on how to do it, or we'll get in a Zoom call and we'll do a screen share or something like that. But you can't expect to hire somebody and have them be brilliant at 10 different things. Like you can't expect them to be brilliant at web design and social media and your bookkeeping. It like that's unrealistic. And it could be that as like business owners are typically smart people who are very motivated, and business owners can learn how to do lots of things and do lots of things themselves. And so, for example, I do my own social media and I do my own web design and I do my own bookkeeping, or I did until I hired an assistant to do that.
Yeah.
But I know that I can do all of those things, but I should not expect that the person that I hire is able to do all of those things, because again, that's unrealistic. Or you need to hire somebody who is hugely experienced and is probably very expensive. I think you're better off hiring somebody who is good at one thing and then training them up in the other parts if you want to do that. So for example, find somebody who already knows how to do bookkeeping and then say, look, would you be interested in doing some of the social media as well? I'll show you how to do that. And I think that's a more realistic approach for a business owner to take.
Yeah. And when I was also receiving some of like applications, I do notice that most applicants would really list down more expertise in their portfolios. And do you think that how do you filter the process if, for example, all of the applications you're receiving are kind of like, I am good at A, B, C, D, instead of just like, I am very good at one or two?
So, okay, so when I'm putting up, and I've put up a lot of job posts on various different sites, going back to the days of Scriptlance and Rent a Programmer and some of those older sites that have been so they've all been bought up and now they're all Freelancer or Elance. Sorry, not even Elance anymore. They've changed the name of that one as well. But there's a lot of consolidation in these websites where you can hire people for tasks. But the key thing is if you're putting up a project or a task or a role and you're getting lots of responses back, as a business owner, you have to try and filter out the responses that are coming back to you, because we got a lot. Like I know that if I put something up on one of those sites, let's say if I put a project up on freelancer.com, about 5 seconds after I post it, I get 3 or 4 responses that quickly. And so the first thing I do is I filter all of those out. If somebody replies that quickly, I know they didn't bother to read the post. And so I just immediately rule those out. I needed to have been live for at least 5 minutes for somebody to read the thing to see if they're actually appropriate for it. So I will immediately rule out the instant responses. And then what I'll do is if I'm going through the responses and there's a lot of them, I'll also rule out people who say that they're experts in doing too much. And so that's going to be a judgment call as to like what that is, like, how much detail that they're claiming. But I at this point, I've hired enough people to know if somebody says that they're an expert in 12 different things, and those 12 things are all really closely related, then that could be true. But if those 12 things are not related at all, then I don't think it's true. And so it'll be based on that. Like if somebody said that they're an expert in web design and WordPress plugin programming and API coding, and they're an expert in JSON coding, they could be like that person is a programmer, is a techie who is tightly focused in one area, and they're just talking about kind of the little kind of circle of things within that one area. They're not saying that they're also an expert in YouTube channel optimization and video editing and social media posting and Google AdWords. So that's what I'm talking about. It's like when they're really focused down. The other thing is I will always put in my instructions, I will always put a key phrase at the bottom, which I ask them to reply with. So I say, most important of all, please make sure you use the word banana in the first line of your response, so I know that you read all the way through these instructions. And I will do that, and then I'll just ignore all of the ones that don't have that word in there. And that helps me to know, because now we're going from, if we drop, like let's say and I think maybe freelancers don't realize this, but when we put up a job, we might get 200 responses. Like that's a lot to have to filter through. And that's why you don't get answers, by the way, from people if you don't get the job, because there's just too many for them to reply to. So I filter. First cut is anybody who responds too quickly. Next is people who have too much or who miss the keyword. So I look for the keyword. Is the keyword there? If it's not, then I'm going to ignore all the responses without it. And then I'm going to look at people who the experience doesn't seem to match. And then I can start to go through, profile by profile, because now we've taken 200 and probably 20 or 30 of them were too quick. And then probably 70 or 80% of the rest didn't put the keyword in. And then we're starting to look at people who actually read the job spec, and then we can go through it. And then in an ideal world, what I'll do is I'll hire 2 or 3 people, the 2 or 3 best people. So I'll go through the list and I'll shortlist them. And then the 2 or 3 best people, I'll pay them to do some work for me. And I'll do a small test project and see how it goes. And then we'll know at the end of that test project, the communication is super important, particularly with remote teams. And people being willing to take the time to write a good message or record a video, or get in a Zoom call, being willing to get in a Zoom call. And I know there's language issues and there's things like that as well. But, now with ChatGPT and these tools as well, there's no excuse for not being able to write a response of some kind and have good communication. And in what we're doing, communication is key. Like the work freelancers and business owners are working together. In the world that I'm in, typically, we're talking back and forth. I'm on Discord. I have a Discord that I've set up with my freelancers where I talk with my video editor and then I talk with my VA. And so we're all in there and we're chatting. We're able to message each other back and forth. That communication is really, really important. And I think that it's probably one of the most important things that you can learn how to do as a freelancer is get better at talking to people, and improving your communication, because that increases trust, and trust is everything.
Yeah, that was, oh my God, that was a lot of information. And I love the banana thing that's one of the things I also do. It's not the same banana word, but it's like do this, or like at the end of the job post, to just make sure that they really read it through it. And yeah, that was like just smart. And I've seen a lot of business owners do that also, but not everyone do that. And that's a really good point to like just put it there also to start finding freelancers. And I did love the hiring 3 people, because that was going to be my next question of like how you can decide on which to hire. But how long do you kind of like work with this 3 people if you kind of like find, like someone you really want to work with already, because there are 3 experts you're currently working, and probably if you have like in like social media, for example, you it would be fit into just like one person, but because you're trying to test which one works, like how long do you want to work with them, just to say of like, okay, as of now, I'm just going to be working with this person?
So I would hire them at the start for a fixed project. So it's not that we're going to be working for a certain length of time. It's not that we're gonna work without any limit. It's just, I just want you to do this one piece. And at the end of that, we'll review the project, we'll revisit and see if we want to do something else. And so it's just a fixed thing, and it's going to be fairly short. And I want that project to be like, I want that to be like a $50 or $70 project. I don't want it to be a $3,000 project. I want it to be something where I can get the feeling. And now I've been hiring freelancers for years online, so I'm pretty, like, I know what the signs are. I know the warning signs about people I don't like working with, and I know signs that somebody's going to be really good. And so you may need to work with somebody for a bit longer if you're new, and learning how to work this, like, this is a key piece, I think, for business owners who are hiring freelancers online. Like the act of learning how to hire people and how to work with them, like, that's something that you need to learn. It's not just going to come instantly to you. You're going to need to learn and experiment and figure that part out as well. And like, it's not like, it's like, some people, they buy a complex piece of project management software or something like that. You don't instantly know how to use it. And it's not instantly going to make your business better. Just because you now have the software, you actually have to figure out how to use it. And in the same way, working with people is, you have to put in the effort. You have to learn how to work with people, how to talk to them, how to hire them. Like, that's part of your job as well. And I think that people who are hiring online, they expect, oh, I'm just going to pay somebody $5 on Fiverr and it's going to be done. And a lot of people writing blog posts, and you'll see people on, particularly people who are kind of selling people on the idea of affiliate marketing and things like that. You'll see a lot of BS out there, which is, oh, it's so easy. You just go on Fiverr, you hire somebody for $5, and suddenly you're going to make $1 million. It doesn't work like that. You've got to learn, you've got to figure things out, and you've got to work with people. And then you've also got to remember that the person who you're working with is a person, hopefully not an AI, and they're a living, breathing human being with their own hopes and dreams and fears and family and all of that as well. So you've got to take that into account in your communications, and like, you're hiring somebody to do a job for you, but just remember they're a human being as well. And so you've got to bring that into it as well.
Yeah, I love that part of, like, making sure it's human and making sure that they also kind of like have, like, you kind of like build loyalty also at the same time, like relationship in there. And this is one of the problems I keep on kind of like hearing from friends or like business owner friends who wants to build like remote team or just colleagues or like classmates and some other things. That one thing that they kind of like worry is that, or like they experienced before, is that they found the best fit, like a great freelancer, great communicator, really good at what they do. And then like a couple of days, they just went out silent. And because they're already trying to scale up, because for them, when you hire someone, you're going to be scaling up in the business. And then it's kind of like where the fear would come in, because they don't have enough human resource to work on the projects that they're currently working. Like, do you have an advice of like, this should be a plan B or a plan C for that kind of situation?
I guess I've got a couple of different pieces of advice there. First is, it's always useful to have a backup person. So one of the things about working with different freelancers and testing people at the start is you can build up a database, and I put them into a spreadsheet. I put their contact information into a spreadsheet. And if I need somebody in the future, I can always reach out to them and say, hey, are you still available? Now, I had this at the start when I launched my podcast initially. I used to have a lot of editing. I don't do any editing anymore with the podcast. I just record it live, straight to tape, and sometimes live streaming. But when I originally started, I used to have somebody edit the podcast, and I actually had 2 editors. And what that meant was we were able to get stuff turned around quicker. And also, if somebody wasn't available for a couple of weeks, it wasn't a big deal because the other person could take it on. And I told them both, I said, look, the way this is going to work is I'm going to give you 50% of the episodes. I'm going to give the other editor 50% of the episodes. And that's like that's the job. That's the gig. And that was the agreement that we came to. It was fine. And so you can have more than one person, and it's nice to have that backup. The other thing, and another type of backup, by the way, because I have a VA who I've been working with for, I think, 2 or 3 years now, and she's full-time. But we also have a VA service. So that's a company who have multiple employees, multiple VAs. And I don't really have a strong personal relationship with any of those people, but they are there as a backup to ICO, so that when ICO, my VA, when she's busy, that we don't, when we want to take some of the work off her plate and just hand something off, particularly if it's something kind of repetitive, we can hire the VA company to do that. And so it's nice to have that kind of backup as well. And I like to just use them every so often, just to keep up the relationship with them, and to make sure like I understand how to outsource something to them, delegate it to them if we need to do that quickly. So that's one part of this. The other part is, if your freelancers are ghosting you, then you're doing something wrong. And so if they're dropping out and not replying, then it could be that the problem is something in their life, or it could be that the problem is you. And you're going to have a serious look at yourself and see, are you expecting too much of them? Are you being aggressive in your communication? Is there something in your management style? Because like, your job is to get better as a manager so that you can grow your business this way. So like, be introspective and think about this. Like, is there something that you might be doing? And it could be that that's not the case. It could be, it could be that their internet went down, or a family member died, or something. Now, one key thing for me is, as a business owner and as somebody who hires freelancers, the only really strict rule I have is no radio silence. So by radio silence, I mean that's where they ghost. That's the only thing. I can't accept that. Like, no matter what your situation is, send me a 1-word text, or a 2-word text, like, family problems, talk later, or family problems, talk to you in 2 weeks, or, in the hospital, I'll get back to you in a month. Just let me know. And then I know, okay, well, now I can go and hire somebody else to take the slack. And that's the only really hard and fast rule that I have, is just keep me up to date with what's going on if you are going to need to drop out. And then at least I can fix things. But somebody just disappearing and ghosting, yeah, it's not nice. And I've done it myself. And by the way, when I say, you may be doing something wrong as a manager, I can tell you that because I've done stuff that wrong as a manager. So I know, like, I've made those mistakes. So I'm not talking to you down from my high position. I've been there, done it, and made all the mistakes you can make. But I know that, like, one thing with particularly when people ghost you, maybe they feel either that they're not being respected, or that you're being too aggressive, or they feel like they can't do what you're looking for. And lots of our human cultures are different from country to country and culture to culture. And some are very forthright and straightforward, and others aren't. And others would rather not have the some people would rather avoid the conversation of having to say, you know what, like, this isn't a good fit. And so they're effectively telling you that by ghosting you. So you've got to figure that out, and you've got to have, and I think that comes back to where the communication part is key. You've got to be able to talk to people. And that's where I think I put it as a requirement in my job specs. I put it as a requirement that they have to be willing to get on a voice call or on a Zoom call. And even if it's not necessary for the task, like, let's say I'm getting somebody to to process some text or take a CSV and turn it into a spreadsheet online or something, like, even if they don't need the Zoom call to be able to do that, I still want them to be willing to do that, because I want to be able to communicate with them. And so that's why I would ask for something like that, because I think that ultimately communication is the most important thing, because what we're doing requires a lot of trust, and it requires understanding what the task is. So that's why I think that part is super important.
Yeah, and I love that you point like all these 3 things. They're just so on point, and like especially the last one where you think like you don't know if they're going through something, because that's one of the things that kind of like some business owners missed also. And the fact that you also say like, as a business owner, you should also do this, makes it like more of like pointing out also that as business owners, we should be aware of things that we are probably missing because we're too busy with a lot of the things that are going on in our business. And you also mentioned that you kind of like work also with two as a you have a backup, especially with your VA right now and another VA agency. And how do you kind of like manage your workflow with that, especially if some other third party comes in and take over someone else's task that you have been working and building relationship, or just being able to work with, like, for example, giving them logins or other kind of like sensitive information, that how does it the other services or the third party services can just come in and take it over?
Well, first thing is, Aiko is the name of my assistant. I said, Aiko, I want to get these people to do this because this is grunt work. This is repetitive work that I don't want you wasting your time with. You're far more valuable than that. And so I want her to work on the more valuable tasks, and I want to give the time consuming stuff over to the service because I don't want to waste her time. She what she's doing, she understands. She's been working with me for years now, and she understands the kind of the nuance and the more important stuff that we're doing. And so that's the first thing. I want her to understand why I'm giving it to somebody else to do. It's not that I'm not giving it to her. I'm taking it off her plate. The second thing is I asked her to manage it. So I said, okay, I want you. I'm going to record I use Loom videos a lot, where I record a video on how to do something. And so I recorded an SOP, standard operating procedure, like this is how we do this task. And I recorded that for them, for the VA service. And I gave it to Aiko and I said, I want you to contact the VA service and basically delegate this project to them. And they're going to need logins. And one of the things that they're using, it's very annoying. It sends a login code rather than having a password. So we can't share the password with them. So every time they need to go in and do it, they need to get the login code. And so we set it up so that the login code goes to her email address, and she's able to get the email about that and send it to them directly. And so she's managing that process. And yeah, so that really helps. And then in terms of like the actual management and delegation of those tasks, so we tend to use Asana for project management. Some of the tasks are too small to put into Asana. And this is something that I don't really have a hard and fast rule about. This is something where I kind of, it's very flexible, and maybe I should be better about this. But sometimes we put stuff in Asana and sometimes we don't. And it really depends, I think, on the scale of the task and yeah, it's a bit wishy-washy as to whether something does go in or doesn't go in. And maybe that's on me to get better at the project management side of things. But like we use tools like so for example, I have an email address where it goes to both me and to Aiko. So she gets a copy of all of the emails that go to my address, so she can then reply for me. And again, we didn't have that set up right away at the start. It took 6 months before I took that step, because I wanted to get to know her and to trust her. And this is a person who now has access to a lot of things in my business because we've built up the trust. And you don't get, like, I wouldn't have that straight away with anybody, where I would give them access to my email and to things like that. So, and then we use other tools for, like, there are some tactical tools that we use for sharing passwords and things like that. We use quickforget.com, which is a service where you can put in a password and it will disappear. So you can share the link with somebody, and 5 days later or 3 days later, whatever time period you set it to, or the number of views, it'll disappear and it'll be gone. So you can share a password with somebody securely through that service. That's something that we use to actually share passwords and delegate access. And then just making sure that, you know, for example, there's little details, like when the video editor shares a video with me that he's just edited and for review in Google Drive, I always get him to make sure that he ticks the box for anybody with the link can view, because then I can take what he shared with me and I can share it with Aiko and ask her to review the video. And whereas if he didn't tick the box for anybody with the link can view, then that means that only I can view it and she can't. And then she has to ask for permission for it. All of those little things are just these minor details, but they're the kind of things that when you get those details right, they can speed up the process. And it can also, as a business owner, it can take you out of the loop. When you put your assistant and your video editor talking together and they're talking directly, I don't need to be involved. Aiko can do the first review and she can see the things that need to be changed. And she can tell the editor, okay, can you go change these things before we even bother Alistair with the next version? And then when I come into work and I'm looking at Discord and I see that they're having a chat back and forth, I don't even need to go and check that stuff until they're ready to come to me. So I can work on something else, like writing a book or writing a LinkedIn post or recording a new video or something. So trusting people and delegating out to them, I think it's something that you've got to get better at, and I'm working to get better at it myself. But I know that it's something that a lot of business owners find difficult to do, is to delegate things to other people, because typically a business owner is pretty good at what they're doing. They're usually multi-skilled, and they can usually get things done quicker than somebody who's new. So like if a new assistant comes in, like let's say it takes me half an hour to do something and it takes Aiko half a day to do that thing. So is it better that I do it in half an hour or she does it in half a day? Well, if that half an hour I can do something else, like write a LinkedIn post or do a live video or do a podcast interview, then maybe we're better off if I delegate that to her. And then she spends half a day doing it. And eventually, if she does that enough times, she gets it from half a day down to a quarter day. And maybe eventually she'll get down to be able to do it in half an hour as well. So, there's that part of it as well. I think that we have to get better at delegating and outsourcing things to people.
Yeah, and I love that you mentioned SOP, because I love how easy it is now for me to just delegate and assign tasks. Like, it takes a while. Like, for me, it was like time consuming at the first part, because you have to like keep on recording, keep on improving your SOPs. But it really was a game changer and lifesaver at the same time. And I did kind of like love also that you mentioned that when you're trying to assign a task, it would take you 30 minutes, and your VA is like half a day. And you kind of, because that's one of the things that some business owners kind of miss, or kind of like try to talk out with their freelancers, that this is taking me 30 minutes, why is this taking you longer? And they don't see the good side of it, or like the other side, which is that person is not an expert of what they're doing. And you kind of like mentioned that you're working with one or two, or like a lot of, or more than a couple of freelancers or team members. Like, do you have like one platform that you manage them, or do you kind of like go from one to another? Like, your communication channel is different from your project management. Like, how does the workflow, I do kind of like notice that the workflow kind of like evolve around your VA also, but like, does it also have like a different, or am I just assuming it? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, and some of the tools, like probably the most important tool if we're talking about, not necessarily software, but like techniques, the most important thing is the SOP. And the way that like SOP is standard operating procedure, for anybody who's not familiar with that. And basically it's a set of instructions on how to do something. And I now have hundreds of SOPs on all sorts of different things. Like here's an SOP on how to do the regular day-to-day bookkeeping. Here's an SOP on how to produce a podcast episode, how to publish a podcast episode. And in fact, we have sub SOPs for lots of different tasks. So one SOP will be how to publish the podcast episode onto the podcast host, and another will be how to publish the podcast episode onto our website. And an SOP it's a list of instructions. And the way that we do it is I start off with a video. So I'll typically record this on Loom, although sometimes we'll hit record during a Zoom video where I'm doing a demo, and I'll actually demo it on screen share. But my VA will take the video, and what she'll do is she'll put it into a Google Doc with screenshots. And so what she's doing is she's creating like a checklist or a procedure document, this SOP document. And the goal is, like, how we discuss it and talk about it is, what happens if you were out for 2 weeks and somebody else had to come in and do this for you? Make sure that the instructions are good enough with screenshots and access information. Like, don't include the passwords in the doc, but talk about where to get the access. And so like that's the building block of everything, is having those SOP documents. And so that somebody else, so we can hand off one of those SOP documents to somebody if we're hiring somebody temporarily, like the VA service, we're getting them to take over something. And so that's the most important thing in the whole thing. And so to create those, we use Loom, which is a screen recording tool, and we use Google Docs. Then we talk on Discord. I used to use Slack. Discord is a bit like Slack. It originally came from the gaming community, but it's the same thing as Slack. You've got all these channels, you can have private messages, and it's probably a little bit more complex than Slack. But the reason why I like it is because Slack's pricing model is just insane. It's either free and it's really limited, or it's hugely expensive, and they don't seem to have much in between. And so I got annoyed with Slack's approach to pricing, and I wanted to move off it. So I moved to Discord. So we have a Discord where I have conversations. We've got a number of channels. We've got a private channel called Bookkeeping, which is myself and my assistant. And then we have a channel about video editing, which has the video editor and Aiko and I. And then we have private messages back and forth. We've got another one for the podcast. And so we'll try and always keep it like in the podcast channel. We've set up a new thread for each podcast episode as it's being created. And that's where we share things like, well, here's the podcast title. Here's the URL that we're going to use. Here's the headshot for the guest. Here's the show notes text. And all of those things we put into each thread for each episode. And so we keep it pretty organized in that sense. And then the other tools that we use, in terms of payment, it depends on the freelancer, where they're from, because freelancers in different countries have different payment methods that they can and can't use. So typically I ask them to invoice me with whatever their payment method is. Like some people invoice me, my video editor invoice me through Payoneer. I use remitly.com for payments to people in the Philippines a lot. So it depends on who the person is and how they work. Some people use Stripe and they can send Stripe invoices. And so it's going to depend on that. But and then we use WordPress for the website, and we use Google Docs a lot. And I've got a lot of spreadsheets where we have like workflow in the spreadsheet. Like the spreadsheet has, here's the list of steps. So it's almost like an SOP. We've got one master spreadsheet that we use for a lot of the podcast related things. Like it's got a list of all of the guests that we've had so far and all of the guests that I'm thinking about inviting on, just to kind of get that a bit organized and to put some shape around that as well. So, and the other thing that you find is eventually you've done something so many times that you don't need the SOP anymore. You just need to be careful about that, because it's good to keep referring back to the SOP as a checklist every so often. And, like we've done 137 podcast episodes. So, like at this point, we're not really looking at that checklist very often when we're producing an episode, because, it's a bit like riding a bicycle. You don't forget that stuff. But it is important to every so often go back and make sure, because for example, somebody gets sick or is going on holidays, you want to be able to take that SOP and it still be up to date and hand it off to somebody else. So those are some of the tools, and thank you. I know I tend to monologue a little bit, so thank you for your patience.
No, it was so valuable, and I love that you really kind of like break down the tools that you use, the SOPs, and it's kind of like helpful. I felt like I'm learning also at the same time through this conversation. And the part of like SOP in general, like standard operating procedure, do you kind of like also update them every now and then, especially if there's like software updates in other platforms maybe, or just like there's a new trend like social media, like there's a new trend that's not working anymore, like a strategy that's not working anymore. So how do you kind of like manage in terms of updating your SOP?
Well, we don't do a lot of that, and we do need to get better. What I have done is on every SOP document, I have right at the top, if there's something in this SOP is incorrect or broken, then immediately contact Aiko and ask her to fix it. And so that's the number one rule, is always check, see if there's something there. But it's I think that you're better off having something that is 99% right or 90% correct rather than not having it at all. So but yeah, it's not super high priority, particularly for tasks where we've done them so many times. Where I find them really useful are for things like our annual accounts, because we only do the grunt work of doing the accounts. We do our weekly bookkeeping and our monthly bookkeeping, which is on a regular basis. So you're doing it often enough not to forget. But once a year, you've got to do your final accounts for the year. And that's where it's been a year since we did it last. I can't remember all the things that we need to do. And it's complex and I don't like doing it either. So that's where the SOP is super valuable, because, okay, this is what we need to do step by step. Here's step number 1, step number 2, step number 3. Here's where to find that. Here's a screenshot of it. Okay, even if the software tool has changed a little bit, we can still figure it out, but it really makes life much easier. So I think that's super important. There's 2 other tools actually I should have mentioned that I use all the time. And one is otter.ai. And that takes audio and turns it into text. So it's an online transcription service, and it's AI based. So it does it automatically. It's machine transcription, but it's pretty accurate. So we use that like to transcribe. I use it for transcribing all of my podcast interviews, my videos, and all sorts of things like that. The other thing that I use is ChatGPT or Claude, which are both LLMs. They're both large language model AIs. And Claude is really good because Claude can take in large blocks of text. Claude can take 75,000 words compared to about, I think, 3,000 for ChatGPT. So Claude can take a lot more. It's good. It's not as good in terms of output as ChatGPT, but I use both of those multiple times a day. One word of caution about that is just be careful about taking the output and using it directly without editing it or without fact checking it, because those like one flaw with ChatGPT and these other large language models is they make up plausible sounding but incorrect information. And so for example, they might make up false sources. And I'll give you an example. I asked it to write a bio for me, and it made up a book that I had never written. And it added it in as if I had written a book, and it wasn't real at all. And it just made it up. But it sounded like a book I could have written. And that's the scary thing about these things, is they can write stuff. If you're not looking at and fact checking them, they can be very plausible. So fact check everything that an AI creates for you, and also don't take the stuff and just copy and paste it without editing it, because usually what it gives you is not good enough to directly post. You probably should be doing some human editing as well. But those are 2 tools now that are super helpful. And one way that we use those, by the way, just to give people an idea, I can put in my transcript from a podcast interview that I do. Let's say we take the transcript of this, and I can say, please give me 10 title suggestions for the podcast episode, and please write up show notes, episode description for me to put on the website and the podcast player. And it can take that and it can produce that. And that's where, these tools can really save a lot of time. So I think that we should be using those to make us faster, not to replace human beings, but to make us faster at what we do.
Yeah, it's like really easy now I think that's one of the thing that freelancers are also worried, because there was a time where it was kind of like hyped up, like AI is going to replace us, or there's no more work for us. There's actually a lot of those content after, I think, ChatGPT was hyped up also. So that was like I love that you emphasize that it doesn't really replace them or humans in general. And even when you kind of like get content or get stuff from it, you still have to really double check, or like have someone else double check, a human being double check their work, or the AI work, because I felt like that's very valuable for freelancers, and even like a lot of business owners also, who is weighing if they should use a chat or like a AI, like any other AI transcription or just content, or still keeping their freelancers. Because one of the things that I get to ask by other business owners is if they could just let go of this person because of AI, or like, yeah. So do you have like a thought about that too, of like weighing in, or have you ever thought of like this thing or this AI tool is now doing the work that I really needed, so I would have to like let go of this person or something?
Yeah, I have a few different thoughts about this. So first off, I like where they are right now is not where they're going to be in 5 years' time. They're going to improve. So the AI that we see right now is the worst it's ever going to be, which is a bit scary. Like they are really good and they're getting more powerful. But I think as well, it's really important to learn how to use them properly. And they're not a magic wand. And I see people using them and acting like, this AI is self-aware, super intelligent, and it's having a conversation with me, and it's, people are getting blown away by the conversation. It's just giving you an answer, the best answer it can think of in terms of sounding plausible. Like that's what they do. They give plausible sounding answers to any kind of query. And it's really great at that, but you need to understand it's not actually self-aware. And if you start to talk to an AI and act like it's like like you're talking to a kind of some kind of advanced alien, it's going to pretend like it is, because it's going to work that way. It's going to give you a plausible sounding response no matter what your question is. But you need to understand it's actually just a really, really smart autocomplete. That's what it's doing. It's giving you an autocomplete based on all of the knowledge that it was trained on. And it's giving you an average answer based on, it's averaging out all of the knowledge that it was trained on and giving you that answer. And so that answer is going to be bland and average and mediocre by definition. And so if you're an expert in your field, you have to bring the expertise in and the point of view, rather than just taking the average answer. And that average answer can be really, really good because the information it's trained on is good. But just remember, like, we're not talking to a self-aware autonomous system. And so that is not like, those systems, they're not going to replace humans. They're going to enhance what we're doing. They're going to enhance our productivity, going to make us much faster at what we do, and help good people to produce more. And I think that if your job is being totally taken over by an AI, then what you were doing was probably fairly was probably, I don't know what the right way to describe this is, but it wasn't that challenging, or there was something there where you weren't providing a lot of value. Because I think that if you're completely replaced by an AI, then you need to find a way to deliver more value for people. And maybe taking and learning how to use AI and learn how to make yourself better and more valuable, then and understanding, for example, like if you're a copywriter and you're worried about AIs taking over, like if you look at the copy that AIs are producing, take a deep dive into this modern digital landscape, and it's producing all this kind of rubbish sounding stuff. Like I wouldn't be concerned about that. What I would be doing is, as a copywriter, okay, how can I produce more for my clients? How can I produce better work for my clients? Or how can I specialize in this area and use it to produce more and become better at what you do, rather than being worried about it. But I think that everybody needs to experiment and learn, because these tools, they don't have an instruction manual. And as business owners and as freelancers, we should be learning how to use these tools and figuring them out, because that's going to be super important. I think it's going to be one of the most important things that you can do is learn how to use these and the capabilities, what they might be able to do for you.
Yeah, and it's really important to also kind of like integrate yourself with what's trending or like what's working, and it makes the work efficient and kind of like faster, but it doesn't really replace you, and that's really good. Takeaways for all those who are listening, both business owners and freelancers, and this has been a very valuable and amazing. I'm learning a lot from this conversation. And now we're down to the ending questions. So, what's your favorite mantra?
Interesting question. Just do it.
Just do it.
I think, and the big issue that a lot of us have about doing stuff, no matter what that stuff is that we feel like we're not ready. So I'm going to wait until I'm ready before I do that thing, no matter what it is. Like it could be starting a podcast or writing a book or starting a business, or any one of these things that feels like something that we need to prepare for. But at some point you have to start, because you're not going to feel ready. And I think that it's important. Like for example, you can read 10 books about learning how to swim, but at some point you need to get in the water if you want to learn how to swim.
Yeah.
And that's like, it's the same with a podcast, it's the same with a live stream, it's the same with a YouTube channel, it's the same with blogging, same with business. At some point you have to just start. And so that's why I think just do it. Do some prep, but the only way to truly learn how to do something is to actually start doing it.
Yeah, that really hit me, because I think this podcast also kind of like took me a while to start and to launch, because I kind of like tried to like give excuses to myself of like, oh, I don't have this yet, I don't have to learn this yet first, or like even the business itself, and even me also writing the book. That was kind of like what you mentioned earlier, and that kind of like, yeah, that really is what happened to me, and that's why it took me a while to really do it, but I did it. So just do it also. So what would also, second one is, what advice would you give to the 15-year-old Alastair McDermott, or your 15 years old you?
Yeah, I've thought about this before. So there's a few different things. So first of all, I would tell 15-year-old Alistair, take up boxing as a sport. You're going to enjoy it a lot more than you'd realize, because I only started boxing when I was 43, and unfortunately I was too old to actually do any competitions or anything, but I actually really love it as a sport. So I would definitely say that. The other thing is, I would say start a business sooner than you think you can, because I didn't start my business till I think I was 28, 27 or 28, I can't remember exactly, around then. And I think that if I had started it when I was 22, 23, that would have been better off. And I also think that I need to specialize a lot earlier. And if I had specialized a lot earlier, that would have been more useful as well. I don't know exactly what that would be, but having a specialization, like it is a key that will unlock a huge amount of value for you. It's a big deal when you specialize. It's something that I talk to people about all the time. Most people don't want to do it because of the fears around it, but it's so valuable to do. It's important.
Amazing. Yeah, that's true. I 100% agree on that. And another one is, how can people reach you? Yeah, how can people fast, or like, where are you mostly active?
Cool. Well, if you're listening to this on a podcast player, if you search for The Recognized Authority, you'll find me. That's the name of my podcast and my brand, The Recognized Authority. You can find me if you go Google The Recognized Authority, or go to therecognizedauthority.com. And I have a ton of stuff. I have maybe 4 or 5 books on Amazon, a lot of which are free. I have the Recognized Authority podcast, and I've got some other podcasts about different things, including a podcast called the Specialization Podcast, which is aimed at helping people to niche down. And it's like a little audio training course. So if you're thinking about niching down, you can check out Specialization Podcast as well.
Awesome. And we're down to the last one. You mentioned about the book, so maybe you have other promotions also, or freebies that people can grab, or the audience can grab for free, or even recent promotions that you currently have.
Yeah, so if there's anybody who's a business owner and they want to build their email list, I have a free private podcast called The Lead Magnet Blueprint. And you can get that if you go to recognizedauthority.com. You can find it under the podcast section, and I'll also give you a link that you can put in the show notes.
Awesome. And most of the things are going to be also in the show notes, and how you can reach Alistair also in different social media platforms. We'll be putting it there as well. So this has been a really productive conversation. Thank you so much, Alistair, for hopping and being here. And yeah, that's it for this episode. See you guys on the next one.
That's all for today's episode of Savvy Talks. We hope you enjoyed the conversation and learned something new to help you on your online money-making journey. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. And if you found today's episode helpful, please leave us a review. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time on Savvy Talks.